Right, let me go. I'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for being here. And let me get this going. Um, so overall, one of the things that I was just thinking about in sort of deciding what to present on is that we focus so much on professional development. We have had folks like Anna, for instance, Dr. Alanis, who has been inspired by her students to go back to school and to pursue additional education. And so with this, I wanted to provide some insight. If it's been a while since folks have been in school, if they're unfamiliar with the graduate admissions process, or just wanting to know the full breadth of information that's out there, that is what I am trying to demystify, at least, and to encourage folks who might want to take the next step. And so, as far as who I am, I have been working in graduate education in some form for 15 years now. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in a content area, specifically in history. After I finished my master's degree, I did teach at Northeast Lakeview College, which is one of the Alamo colleges in the San Antonio area, on and off for a period of about 6 or 7 years. I made the decision to get an EDD in educational leadership. I worked with master's and doctoral students when I was a full-time graduate student advisor at UTSA between 2008 and 2016. Among many other things, I was in charge of recruitment, in onboarding new students. I was part of the admissions process for the doctoral program, which was a competitive process. I've been a faculty member at Iowa State in both a master's and a PhD and EDD programs, as well as I'm currently the program coordinator for the MED program and the PhD program. I am not here to sell you on Iowa State at all. So I'm just selling or mentioning that just so you know, like, I have worked with graduate students in many different capacities as both a faculty and staff member. Ultimately, when anyone comes to me and says that they're interested in any form of graduate school, the first thing I will do is ask why they want to pursue it. I've actually can remember one of my master's students who was interested in a PhD, and as I started asking her some questions, she came back to me about a month later and said, actually, you know what? I realize I don't want a PhD. I want to make a change in my life. And so she decided to go back to school to become a yoga instructor. And I think that that ended up being more of her path. And so I am not trying to talk anyone out of pursuing graduate education at all. I think it's just knowing that committing to a graduate program can be time intensive, it costs money. It can take a lot of time and effort and sanity and whatever to pursue. And so some questions that I ask students to think about is, how does this fit into your life? Are there any adjustments that you have to make? I think especially if you are a parent or co-parent to children, or if you are a caregiver in some form, those are some of the adjustments of just thinking of how do you maintain your commitment to various obligations while also fitting one more thing, which can be challenging. How will I pay for this? I do offer some insight into some financial aid options and want to talk through some of those. Um, Asking, what do you want to do professionally? If you already have a master's degree, how might a doctoral degree directly support that goal? Or can that be achieved through a second master's degree or a master's degree, or maybe a graduate certificate or things like that? Can you do what you want to do without having a whole nother degree? I think is a big question to be asked. And do you have a backup plan just in case? So as far as where you begin, I always think that it's not so much about researching programs, it's about talking to folks within your circle and your network, within your family, whether that be a partner, a parent, a co-parent, children, anyone who's directly under your care, your friends. I do think that the commitment to pursuing grad school requires their buy-in and their understanding. I'm going to come back to the point about HR representative, but I think definitely talking to your supervisor and colleagues is important, especially if you work in some sort of team setting. I think starting to be proactive about how demands of your time might change or what sort of sacrifices or compromises you may need to make is really great to have, and to kind of especially know where your supervisor is and in their level of support and their level of patience and understanding as you decide to go through this. Um, and just as an example, when I was working on my dissertation, I worked on a team where we often traveled to recruit master's and doctoral students, and some of these trips would be overnight, out of town and or out of state. And so, as I was working through my dissertation, I went to my team and to my direct supervisor, and committed to working every in town recruitment session if I could do that in exchange for not having to travel or having to have too much disruption where I would lose work time for my dissertation. Like, I didn't want to lose my weekends or my evenings um in any sort of after hours work for this. And that was something that for that semester, for that academic year, they were willing to work with me with.
Mhm.
Um, if you are at a community college that offers tuition benefits, I think having really direct questions with an HR, like a benefits representative at your college, is something, and this might actually be a series of conversations. And one thing I write in there is get everything in writing if you can. And so I strongly suggest that you ask things like what kinds of programs the college is willing to pay for, how they will pay those. Oftentimes what I see is that you will put up the money for the tuition and fees up front. And then once you finish the class and submit a transcript showing usually a grade of at least a B or better, then they will reimburse you for those. They may also require things like documentation of what classes are required for the degree program, that you can get from the program itself or from the advisor. Just if there's any sort of conditions, any expectations around what grade you get, what courses you can take, anything like that. I strongly, strongly suggest that you find out what the conditions are. Even though I see this more with the private sector than with the public sector, there might also be expectations around if they're paying for your education, then you are making a commitment to stay at that company or that organization for a predetermined amount of time past your graduation date. So it might be if it took you 2 years, if they funded your master's program for 2 years, you may be committed to stay there for 1 year or 2 years, or you may have to pay some of that money back. Again, that's kind of something I tend to see more with private corporations that offer tuition benefits than private sector benefits, but it is worth asking just what the conditions are. Something else that I would strongly recommend, and I say this because this actually happened to me. If you are looking, if you are especially a faculty member where the pay scale might actually change, like you might move up the pay scale according to how much graduate education you have or what degrees you've attained. So I think that when I started teaching for the Alamo colleges, they were paying me for having a master's degree. But then if I decided to take 12 hours of graduate education, like essentially in 12-hour increments, I could be eligible for a certain pay bump. This was as an adjunct, not a full-time faculty member, but these are all pay scales that many community colleges have. I was still teaching for them when I finished my doctorate, and I went to go submit that paperwork to get an increase in the, amount of salary I was being paid per course as an adjunct. They actually came back and told me that they would not pay me for having a doctorate because my doctorate was in educational leadership and my teaching field was history. So at least I see you're shaking your head. So I saw this when I worked at UTSA, where we had students who were taking classes in reading and literacy, so that they could teach some of the literacy courses, like the developmental reading courses, when standalone developmental reading courses still existed in Texas. Um, they used to fight us all the time because UTSA's literacy courses at the time were listed under curriculum and instruction. So even though reading or literacy showed up in the course titles, they usually challenged students who would submit their transcripts of, well, they're not really reading courses. We usually had to write letters saying, no, they are reading courses and things like that. Um, HR folks are not bad people, but they are making sure that policy is followed to the letter, like the most literal interpretation of the policies. So even if you have a series of conversations with HR folks, then I suggest that maybe afterwards you like send them an email and just ask for a summary in writing so that you have it for your records just in case, to make sure that you follow the policy and everything like that. And then that way, there's clear communication lines between you and the HR representative you'd be working with to claim those benefits. I think the other thing that I would just say is just being aware that in many cases, tuition benefits programs for graduate education are considered taxable income. So just something to be aware of. Excuse me. Yeah, that's great, Elisa. So, yeah, just having those really clear conversations with HR are so important. How would I pay for this? So to continue that conversation around, paying and things like that, finding grants and scholarships can be really challenging. And so it can be kind of time intensive. It can be something that you need to be creative about. Um, if you don't want to take out loans and you perhaps don't want to use tuition benefits or may not have access to tuition benefits. I want to say that, like, if you're paying out of pocket, most universities can initiate some sort of payment plan with you if that's something that you can look at paying as you go. Um, but if you're looking for scholarships, I think it's being on the right cycle in that process for applying for scholarships that can be the most important. Timing is really so important. The best time to be looking for scholarships and applying for them is typically going to be in January and February. A lot of deadlines may be March, and that will be to kick in for the next academic year that starts in August. If you are a student who is trying to look for grants and scholarships right now for the 2023 academic year that starts in a couple of months, you're probably already too late. At this point, what programs are probably going to be offering you are loans. Big thing, like, should you fill out the FAFSA even if you don't intend on taking out loans? Honestly, if you're looking for institutional grants and scholarships, a prerequisite for considering your application, even if it's a non-need based scholarship or a non-need based grant, might be to have that FAFSA information with it. In the last few years, the FAFSA has changed so that you don't have to base it on the most recent tax year. You can actually go back 2 years, and then that way you don't have to wait for your current year or the most recent previous year of taxes to be filed in order to submit that. I do think in the last like 5 to 7 years, they have made the FAFSA process easier. And so even if you don't think you're going to do it, I would say go ahead and submit that. Something that was really interesting, and I don't know if all universities do this, but UTSA actually had grant money set aside for their graduate students that was kind of first come, first serve, and it was based on when your FAFSA was submitted to the university, whatever that submission date was. And they even had one for the summer cycle that you just had to go in and like into the system and say that you intended to enroll in the summer. And I want to say that almost every year I got about $500 maybe a year or a semester or what have you, which adds up over time. And that's just 500 less dollars that I didn't have to worry about. So, um, as far as like how you find out about those kinds of things, go talk to a graduate representative, like go talk to the graduate school or go talk to someone in financial aid who's really focused on graduate students and ask them those questions. Say like, I want to exhaust everything um besides loans, or I want to say like loans are going to be the absolute last thing that I'm gonna take out. I want to see what other grants, scholarships, etc. I can get. The department or college that you apply for may have separate financial resources aside from the financial aid system that you can see if they have available. They may also have things for like books, professional development, like going to conferences and things like that. So don't be afraid to ask about that. Um, and check out community-based organizations in your area. I actually received I think it was $1,000 scholarship from the San Antonio chapter of the American Association of University Women. I know that there are various local chapters of the Hispanic Women's Network of Texas. There's definitely one in San Antonio. I'm pretty sure that there are others. Um, See if your college offers any scholarships specifically for faculty and staff. And then also don't be afraid to look at the professional organizations, especially state level ones. And so some that I thought of would be like TACUSPA, if you're in that, TACO, if you're in that, the Texas Association of, that should be community college teachers. It's extra A instead of a C. And then like the Texas Association for Chicanos in Higher Education. I think with Dacha in particular, something I would say is they do have some awards that have cash prizes that you might be able to also use to help fund your graduate education. So as far as researching programs go and now starting to get into like, where am I going to go? What does the program look like and things like that? I think knowing what kind of program, is it an education program? Is it in a discipline? Is it a leadership program, et cetera, is good to know. Honestly, asking if you're place bound, if you're willing to move or if you're really looking for something within an hour drive or 2 hour drive or things like that. Do you need to be funded is important. Having those conversations with your family or HR representative about what that looks like, or if, for example, to be a doctoral student, you really need to be funded, then does that mean you need to also be considered for programs that have fellowships and will fund you to be a full-time student? The flexibility of the program, I think one thing that has really flourished in the last 10 years is more and more graduate programs that really cater to part-time students, more online availability, like completely online programs, evening and or weekend classes. The vast majority of master's programs, I think, really cater to working adults, regardless of discipline, and have the ability for you to take classes at your own pace and things like that. So, just be aware of those. There is usually a lot of flexibility there. You can always ask programs to provide information about where their alumni are finding jobs. And if you can talk to students to find out about, they can connect you with program alumni or maybe students who are about to graduate. I think understanding how a particular program will complement where you are now in your journey and professionally where you think you want to go is really great. And then for doctoral programs, I'll come back to this, but there's always a big question of, do you want an EDD or a PhD, and kind of what are the differences between those? Just so you know, these are available. One option that you can consider is a graduate certificate program. Just to be clear, this is not a teacher certification. This is not typically anything that is attached to any sort of formal certification. A graduate certificate is different from a graduate diploma in that it's usually only about 12 to 18 hours of graduate level work, and it may be one that is in a specific field. And so I tried to pick universities that were in the areas of a lot of our participating colleges. But for example, Texas State offers one in adult English, English as a second language, as well as learning disabilities and inclusion. UTSA offers a graduate certificate in Mexican American Studies, as well as higher education administration. UTRGV offers educational technology, online instructional designer, Mexican American Studies, higher education teaching. I thought this one at UT Arlington was really interesting. It's in a Hispanic serving leadership preparation. Um, these can run the gamut of what it is. If you are someone who is trying to become an expert in online teaching, doing one of these educational technology programs or the online instructional designer might be really helpful. If you are looking to get into administration, higher education administration would be great. I think overall, what I would usually recommend these for folks who already have a master's degree, and maybe they're not interested in pursuing a second master's degree, but are interested in some sort of ongoing professional development that maybe they can't get from professional organizations. Um, I thought about doing a higher education administration graduate certificate before I'd made the jump to do my EDD program in ed leadership. So again, this is not an endorsement of any particular program, but it's just something that is an option, and that there are a lot of different programs attached to this. Honestly, like from an institutional perspective, a lot of these graduate certificates get offered because these are classes that they're already offering, and they can make for a pretty good recruitment tool. Maybe you have someone who's on the fence about doing an entire graduate program. And so you can say to a prospective student, hey, like you can try this program, maybe take 4 or 5 classes of it. And if you don't like it, you can exit out with this graduate certificate, or you can make the decision to stay in it. And so, it can take about half the time of a master's program, since it is like 12 to 18 hours, and most master's programs are going to be like 30 to 36 hours. One disadvantage is if you were trying to seek financial aid, like if you're trying to take out loans for it, if you were classified as a non-degree seeking student at the institution, you're not going to be eligible for financial aid for these. And because it's not a degree program, you should probably check with the college to see if they're willing to cover it if you are planning on using tuition benefits. And then overall, just to reiterate, it's not a degree. It's also not a like state certification. So master's degrees, there's a whole alphabet soup of different kinds of master's degrees. If you don't hold a master's degree and you want to teach at a college or university, typically the most basic requirements are that you hold a master's degree with at least 18 graduate credit hours in the teaching field. And that is to help you develop content area expertise. I had a master's degree, or I have a master's degree in history, and that qualified me to teach in history and history only. If I had wanted to teach English, for instance, I would need to go take 18 hours of graduate level coursework in English to be able to be credentialed for that. Master's degrees can vary widely in terms of if they require a thesis option or some sort of alternative, like culminating project. Maybe it's a capstone or a portfolio or something like that. You can absolutely ask that. The master's program that I work for is coursework only. So you take 30 credits or 10 classes total, and there's no like thesis requirement or anything like that. As far as the delivery option goes, there might be completely online. It may vary if it's synchronous or asynchronous. So if there's still times that you need to meet. Like I said, I do think that most master's programs now really do cater to full-time working professionals who are pursuing this on a part-time basis, but it's definitely worth asking. how they're able to help students in that way. As far as doctoral degree options, I mean, often these differ from masters because they may be more focused on theory and the application of theory than on practice. Depending on the field, you may have to have a degree in a specific field or discipline to be considered for admission. So, if you don't have a master's degree in psychology, you may not be able to get into a doctoral program in psychology, for instance. Um, if you are going into a doctoral program in education, I think that there is a pretty wide expectation that you have at least at least I would say 3 to 5 years of full-time professional experience in order to be a competitive candidate. So if you are trying to go straight through from a bachelor's to a master's to a doctoral program, at least in education, almost regardless of field, that's going to be really hard to do because if you're going into a K-12 education field, the committee is going to want to know what classroom teaching experience you have in that sector. If you are in a higher ed or trying to get into a higher ed PhD or EDD program, I think that they want to know that you have been exposed to the college and university environments as a working professional, that you understand sort of the basics of how they're structured, how they operate, and can make sense of the theory from a practice-oriented perspective. Um, but as far as why get a doctorate, I think for most people, there's an acknowledgement that within higher education, you may reach a certain level or a certain ceiling where if you don't have a doctorate, you may no longer be eligible to apply for certain jobs. So if you want to be a dean or if you want to be like an executive cabinet member or a president or something like that, it would be highly unusual for you to be a competitive job candidate for some positions if you didn't have a doctorate. And then the EDD or PhD divide. I will tell you, I have an EDD. I work in a world and in a capacity on a day-to-day basis where most of my colleagues have PhDs. So this may be some level of essentialization, but it is just trying to determine or to make distinctions between what some of the big differences are between an EDD and a PhD. EDD, the Doctor of Education, is often thought to be a practitioner's degree. So someone who is really focused on remaining a scholar practitioner, maybe they want to go into leadership. These programs can vary widely. Oftentimes, they may be offered with the expectation that most of the students in it are full-time working professionals who want to remain working as such. And so there might be more online or hybrid or even weekend formats to the ways that they are offered. They may be 3 to 4 years in length. There are EDD programs that don't require a dissertation. They may have some other type of culminating experience. Chances are, because the program is offered at such an accelerated pace, the curriculum is really fixed. And so they will just give you a list of classes or course rotation and say, these are the classes you're taking, and these are the classes that are required. There is a stigma around EDD programs and that they are in some ways perceived to be lesser. Honestly, I feel like that is changing. And that's why I put at the end of the day, you, regardless of what program you pick, you are still called doctor. It is still recognized as a terminal degree. All that to say, with a PhD, typically these are programs that are suited to pursuing or to preparing research-focused faculty positions at universities. Students who often go into PhD programs are funded to be full-time students. They may be taking classes while also working for the department in some sort of research assistantship or teaching assistantship. The program can usually take longer, like maybe closer to 4 to 6 years, requires an original research project in the form of a dissertation. And there may be more more room for students to tailor their program according to their individual needs and interests. In addition to everything that I already mentioned in terms of sort of logistical and practical considerations, I mean, I do think understanding the programmatic focus or the emphasis is really important. For example, if you are in the community college world and you want to remain in the community college world, I think asking a program what sort of content that they have that is focused on community colleges, or what is your ability to explore issues around community college education is important and helpful. Is there an ability to tailor a program to you, and to ensuring that you can get out of the program what you want? And something that I always say is, like, maybe even consider one option that feels out of reach, or don't make assumptions about what is possible within a graduate program. I think an example of this is, I think folks are usually surprised to hear that our distance education programs at Iowa State, for instance, out-of-state students get in-state tuition. And so, like, our master's program in community college leadership might actually be really accessible to a much broader audience. And we have had students from Texas, from California, from Minnesota, et cetera. So, if there's a school that you connect with, don't assume that it's out of reach for you. Maybe just start asking those questions and seeing if you can enroll there, because you might be surprised. As far as how you get into finding out more information, one, check out the program's website, see what's on the specific college website, the specific program website. Also look at the graduate school. They may also have information about general financial aid, and things like that. You can always see if there's a staff member or an advisor who's a dedicated point of contact for that program, and they are usually the person who's paid to know all of the things about the program. You can also reach out to faculty members who you might be interested in working with, or just want to hear about the program from their point of view. I think overall, just a reminder that there is a certain amount of etiquette to reaching out to individuals. For instance, like right now, many faculty at universities work on 9-month contracts, and they just might not be as available during the summer to meet with students. Sort of the same thing with winter break and whatnot. So just being mindful that there might be times where faculty are less responsive, and they're not doing that to be rude or to be dismissive or anything. It's just sort of the way that the calendar rolls, and just how people's availability goes. If you have previous unused credits for whatever reason, like I want to address, with Catch the Next, we encourage folks who go through our yearly symposiums to apply and to obtain those 3 graduate credits that you can get from UT Austin. You may have taken graduate level credits for somewhere else, and there is always the opportunity to explore whether or not another university can use those credits. Transfer policies can vary widely from university and programs. And so some of the things that they'll take into consideration is where the credit's from. Is it from a regionally accredited university? Is it actually graduate credit? I know at UTSA, master's students were expected to finish their master's degrees in 6 years or less. And so anything over 6 years was considered expired coursework. There were mechanisms for appealing that time limit on courses, but that was something that had to be considered within also taking into account the transfer. So it wasn't a hard no for students who maybe had a class that was 7 years old or something like that, but there were extra steps to get approvals for that. And again, every university is a little bit different, but it is worth asking if you have credits you've already paid for. Knowing what grade you received, I think the expectation is that you have a B or better in any course that you're trying to transfer in, and then how applicable the course content is to your program. They may say, like, we will take, if it's an education program, they may be willing to take the UT Austin credits, but if you have like a random business class, for instance, that might be harder to justify as counting toward the degree. Um, the thing that I would say is if you have these, I would say find the syllabi, because as a graduate advisor, I can tell you that was normally one of the first things I would ask for. If you don't have it, if it's a UT Austin credits, ask Dr. Chavez, or if it's from somewhere else, maybe start asking the departments if they can help track them down. That is normally like the one thing we don't keep from our classes that universities do ask for. And also, if you are planning to go the graduate certificate route, just know that oftentimes transfer credits won't be taken for graduate certificates. The line of thinking is you're only taking 3 or 4 classes from us, therefore we want you to take all of those with us. Some timelines to consider, application deadlines can vary widely. So for PhD programs and EDD programs, for a fall start, you may be applying as early as November or December with sort of a final deadline in maybe February or March. Very, very few doctoral programs actually begin in the spring. I would say 95% of the ones I've ever seen start in the fall and may keep their doctoral students together as a cohort. So that is why they do it. We'll say the research is very clear that cohort models are the most successful way of delivering doctoral education, which is a big reason why they do that. Some, but not all master's programs may only admit once per year. A lot of times they do rolling admissions, so you could even start in the summer. It can take 2 to 3 months, depending on what they ask for, to to fill out an application and to get an admissions decision. So, some things that usually take the longest time is obtaining transcripts and having official copies of your transcripts sent to the university, GRE scores if those are applicable, asking for letters of recommendation if those are needed. Um, and so, just be aware of that. I say a rule of thumb is usually etiquette is give folks at least a month to write a letter of recommendation for you. That's not something that you want to ask for and be like, hey, can you do it in the next 48 hours? Because one, it's probably not going to be a good letter, and two, they're probably going to be kind of annoyed with you when they write it. So um, just be aware of that. So again, official copies of your transcripts, usually it's official copies from every place that you've attended, which can be kind of cumbersome, but it is the policies of a lot of universities. More and more programs are getting away from GRE scores altogether. And so if you haven't taken the GRE recently, before you sign up to take a $200 test that can be really anxiety inducing for some folks, make sure that you check whether or not the program even requires it. I can tell you that even a lot of doctoral programs in education have moved away from GRE scores, just knowing that they're not actually the most accurate way of predicting a student's performance in the program, and have usually actually been a gatekeeping tool for students. There might be a statement of purpose or an academic writing sample. Sometimes those are used interchangeably. Your statement of purpose might serve as a writing sample. Your letters of recommendation, having a resume or a curriculum vitae, depending on what sort of format you want to put that in. If you're an international student and don't meet the criteria for exemption, then also having either TOEFL or IELTS scores according to what that university accepts is important. A question I get asked all the time is who can write me a letter of recommendation, especially if you're applying for, like, let's say a doctoral program and it's been 20 years since you completed your master's program and you did not remain in contact with your master's faculty members or things like that. Usually it's a mix of academic and professional references. And so academic references can be a past advisor or instructor, preferably from your master's program, who can speak to how you did academically. As a professional, I would say someone who has direct supervisory role over you is a really good one. At the same time, I have seen folks who have had letters from their president, from their VP, from their dean. It all just depends on what sort of relationship you have with them and how you feel that they can speak to your work ethic, to your ability to complete projects on time. Um, if it is 3 professional references because it has been some time since you got your master's degree or something like that, that's usually not a deal breaker for folks. Very rarely, do I ever hear that in a meeting where folks are like, "Well, they don't have an academic reference," or something like that. Honestly, even depending on what sort of professional job you have, your supervisor might be able to think through, like, are you a good educator or are you a good communicator? Do you have strong presentation skills or things like that? So those are the same sort of things that an academic reference might also speak to. Some of the things that I think make a really promising graduate student is someone who's intellectually curious, someone who's a good writer, a strong writer, and a strong communicator, someone who will finish what they start, someone who can think about their past goals or their past experiences and how those connect to future goals, and then someone who fits within the program. Meaning that someone who has that sort of experience that aligns with the content of the program, or that we feel like we can adequately support their stated professional goals and academic goals. Um, as far as writing the statement of purpose goes, I want to be sure, this is a personal narrative. Using first person language is completely acceptable, and saying I and me it would be weird if you were talking about yourself in the third person, quite honestly. Like, I would find that a little bit jarring. I think some things to say could be a summary of who you are, what your professional and academic backgrounds are, what brought you to pursuing a doctorate or a graduate program, knowing what your short and long-term goals are, what you hope to study, and if applicable, who you hope to study with. As you decide where you're going to apply, ensuring that it'll align with whatever the expectations of the program are is really helpful. Individual programs might have actual prompts for you to write to. So this might be some of the content that goes into a statement of purpose, but also know that they might have specific questions that they want you to ask you, or that they want you to answer. Our EDD program, for instance, has a specific question about how folks like promote equity and diversity in their job, for instance, or how they feel about equity and diversity, like in community college settings. So those sorts of things might be helpful to think about and to write to. And just to say it again, like, this oftentimes does serve as your academic writing sample. So make sure it's been proofread for clarity, for grammar, for spelling mistakes, and all of those things. As far as what gets considered, oftentimes we are trying really hard to take a holistic approach to applications, regardless of whether or not those are graduate master's programs, or doctoral programs. We want to look at the whole person, not necessarily one GPA, one GRE score, one letter of recommendation, or something like that. If you have one letter of recommendation that's kind of on the fence, but you have two really strong ones that are glowing, those are going to probably be the voices that rise to the top. If there's a tendency to deny, it's usually not based on one thing. Um, Doctoral admissions do tend to be competitive, meaning that there might be more applications than there are slots available for them to accept. So knowing that just meeting the minimum requirements for admission doesn't guarantee you admission into the program. Master's programs and graduate certificate programs generally aren't competitive. I guess where it becomes competitive is if they offer, you have required courses where there are more students who need to take a course in a given semester than there are seats in that particular course. And so registration can get competitive. Um, some things that aren't necessarily in your control is like the availability of funding, the ability of faculty to take on new students. So, if you don't get funding for 1 year, that doesn't mean that there won't be funding available for other years. Or, if you want to study with a particular person, but their docket is full, that doesn't mean that they didn't want to take you. It just might mean they didn't have the capacity. And, I kind of already touched on these, but like in the process of if if you want to be budget conscious as you're applying to graduate school, depending on the university, the cost of requesting transcripts and having those sent, that might be, at $5, $10, but if you're applying multiple places, that might add up very quickly. GRE scores, that can be the cost to take the test itself, as well as the cost to have those scores sent anywhere. Graduate school application fees may range from $30 to $100. They can vary widely. So if you were a McNair Scholars Program participant, definitely letting them know that you participated in McNair is great, because that means that there are usually waivers for participants of that program. It also doesn't hurt to ask the graduate school if they have any waivers or reductions for the graduate school application fee. They may not be things that they actually advertise, and they may tell you no. And if they tell you no, then that's fine. Then it's the regular application fee. But I do think that that's something that's worth asking, that like folks don't usually tell you. And then if you took a semester abroad, or you received a diploma from outside of the United States that's not in English, like that's another thing. Paying for a professional service to actually translate your transcripts can be pretty cost prohibitive for some students. Some things, I think having an open mind about the process, having a backup plan, not pinning your hopes and dreams on one school or a certain advisor, knowing the differences between these different kinds of degrees, but in particular for the doctoral programs, knowing the differences between the PhD and EDD, honestly, they're highly subjective. It really depends on what you want to get out of the program. So I would say, rather than starting with other people's opinions of the programs, I would say start with your own goals and go from there. And other than that, are there any questions or anything that I can expand upon for this?
Uh, I just wanted to say that for our seminars, that we do often get requests for a copy of the syllabi by
Mhm.
the administration.
Mhm.
The student would have it, but I guess, want an official one
Mhm.
from us. So they do reach out to us, and our faculty have asked to use it in their courses that they need to be able to qualify at a different level, but they have had to kind of put them as selectives
Mhm.
versus, let's say, history or English or whatever discipline they may be covering. Um, but so far, we've been lucky in that they've been able to accept it.
Yeah.
Um, we've also had people that have used it for a promotion. So they've asked us to go ahead and verify that. So although it's not necessarily in the discipline, it is helpful,
Mhm.
particularly as they start to move up the ladder. We've had a lot of people that started as adjuncts, and we do have a good track record where they eventually get hired because they did get higher education. And the last one just told me a few days ago that, after years, he actually finally was able to be promoted. And in part, it had to do because of the seminars.
That's
Uh,
awesome. I
yeah.
mean, it all adds up after a while. I know that I worked with a friend who was an English instructor at Northeast Lakeview, who ended up doing the higher education administration graduate
Mhm,
certificate at UTSA, and she wrote about it and submitted it when she went up for tenure
mhm.
at Northeast Lakeview. And I think that that did make a difference. I think that
Right,
unfortunately, like, even though education isn't necessarily a content area unless you are
right,
an
right.
education folks, I think where I have tried to like make those arguments of like why it matters is we're trying to boost interactions with students, trying to boost student success outcomes, like regardless of discipline.
Mhm,
And so, and to do things that enhance the teaching and learning experiences for the students.
mhm.
And so,
Right,
for me, that's something that's cross-disciplinary.
right,
And
right.
hopefully if you have that ability to argue that back with the HR representative who again might be
Mhm.
interpreting the policy as very, very
Right.
literal. Um, I think in my case, honestly, I didn't push it that much further because
Mhm.
I ended up leaving San Antonio anyway, so it didn't really
Right.
matter at the time. But um,
Mhm.
yeah, having those conversations like Elisa, it sounds like you're doing now
Mhm.
is really important.
Mhm. Yes. No, and I guess we got to work on those graduate uh scholarships and things, to kind of identify them and kind of track a few that could be targeted now that I think we're seeing, at least internally as an agency and our partners, we're seeing more of a movement. Our students and our faculty are like, okay, let me take it to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know we had several alumni that got the master's degree, and now they're talking about a PhD or law school. And of course, they're asking us because they still ask us, right? Um, and so I think we're going to have greater numbers
Mm-hmm.
of people asking that information. And with our faculty, it's just amazing how many already have got the PhD from the time we started.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I guess a thought that I would say, I think to the point that you're making, Dr. Chavez, about resources and about scholarships, I think something that I always say is like don't rule out. I know that we know that private institutions are
mhm,
often much more
right,
expensive, but they also may have a lot more
mhm,
flexibility in
right.
being able to offer
Um,
like some sort of tuition rebates or things like that. So don't rule out private institutions. And then
mhm,
also, yeah, you do. I feel like the biggest challenge is actually with part-time doctoral students who aren't on some sort of fellowship, as well as
mhm,
master's students. I
right.
say master's students have just enormous challenges in trying to
Mhm, mhm,
really good scholarships and
yeah,
grants, and then that way they don't have
right,
to take out additional loans,
mhm,
loans or anything like that.
right. I think the price of the institution makes a difference because even Ivy League schools that would give you a full ride for undergraduate
Mhm.
do not do so for the graduate school level.
Mhm.
You may get, on average, maybe 20 to 30 grand.
Mhm.
Uh, but given the cost, you do have a gap
Mhm.
that is not as easy to fill, for the 2 or 3 years or 4 years that it may take
Yeah,
you,
it's true.
you know.
It's true.
Um, and you may not need a whole 4 years. You may be able to do the coursework in two, but knowing how to make sure that you are still registered so that you don't have to pay loans, I think is the catch.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, no, it's good. My son just got into the executive MBA at Harvard. I mean,
Oh,
Yale, Harvard.
that's
I've had,
amazing.
yeah,
Congratulations to him.
I've had a Harvard on. I was dealing with Stacy, trying to connect her to that. Are you part of the Harvard publishing review group?
Mm-mm.
Basically, what they do, you can sign up as a faculty person. Just look it up. It's Harvard